The morning sun painted the quiet neighborhood in golden light as Daniel Carter parked his black SUV in the driveway of his new home. The air was fresh, the street peaceful, and the gentle rustle of trees made him smile. After years of saving, working overtime and living in small apartments, he had finally bought his dream house. To him, this wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of peace after years of hard work in the city police department. He stepped out, stretched his tired arms, and looked around. It was a beautiful suburban street. Big lawns, shining cars, and clean sidewalks. The kind of place where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved good morning to each other. Daniel had seen neighborhoods like this in magazines and always wondered what it would feel like to live in one. Now he finally knew. But as he started unloading boxes, he felt eyes on him. Curtains moved. People peeked through windows. A man walking his dog slowed down, pretending to fix the leash while staring. Daniel noticed but tried to ignore it. He smiled politely, but the man turned his face away. A woman across the street whispered something to her husband. They both looked at Daniel, then quickly stepped inside. Daniel sighed softly. It wasn't the first time. He had felt this kind of silence before, that heavy, uncomfortable silence that said, "You don't belong here." But he had learned to carry himself with calm. Being a black man in America, he had faced worse. He had earned respect the hard way, through patience, kindness, and unshakable strength. As he carried another box to the porch, his neighbor on the left, an older woman with white hair and kind eyes, came out. "Need a hand, dear?" she asked kindly. Daniel smiled, relieved. "I'm good, ma'am, but thank you. I'm Daniel, just moved in." "I'm Mrs. Turner," she said with a warm grin. "Welcome to the neighborhood. It's about time we got someone nice on this street." Her kindness touched him. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner, that means a lot." She waved and went back inside, leaving Daniel with a bit of hope. Maybe things weren't so bad. Maybe people just needed time. Inside, Daniel unpacked boxes filled with memories, his police medals, his father's watch, and photos from his years of service. He placed one picture on the shelf, him in uniform, shaking hands with the mayor. He smiled at it proudly. This house, this life, he had earned it. That night, Daniel sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The sky was painted with stars and the air smelled of fresh grass. He watched the quiet street and felt peace settling in his chest. But as he relaxed, a car slowed down in front of his house. Two people inside stared openly before driving off. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He knew what that meant, curiosity mixed with judgment. He took a deep breath and forced himself to smile. He reminded himself, new place, new people. They'll come around. Still, something about the way that car lingered made his stomach feel heavy. The next morning he found a note on his mailbox. It wasn't signed. It simply said, "Keep this neighborhood clean. We have standards here." Daniel stood still, reading it again and again. He looked at his spotless yard, his trimmed bushes, his clean driveway. Everything was perfect. He folded the note quietly and slipped it into his pocket. He refused to be angry. Not yet. That night, while unpacking the last few boxes, Daniel thought of his mother's words from years ago. "Son, never let anyone tell you where you don't belong. You make your place and you hold it with dignity." He smiled faintly, whispering, "Yes, Ma." Outside, the wind picked up, and the street lights flickered softly. The neighborhood looked peaceful, but Daniel could feel the tension hiding beneath the quiet. He didn't know it yet, but the real test of his patience, courage and heart was only beginning, and when it came, he would face it not just as a man, but as a protector, a leader, and the chief of police who would soon show this neighborhood what true dignity looked like. A week had passed since Daniel Carter moved into his new home, and the excitement had slowly faded into unease. He still greeted his neighbors every morning, offering warm smiles and polite nods, but most of them gave nothing back. They looked at him like he was a stranger invading their peace, not a man simply trying to live his life. One morning, as Daniel sipped his coffee on the porch, a white envelope caught his eye in the mailbox. It was marked with bold red letters, "From the Homeowners Association." Curious, he opened it right there. The letter inside was short but sharp. It said his vehicle violated neighborhood standards. It complained about his overly bright porch light and improper lawn maintenance. It even warned of fines if the issues weren't fixed immediately. Daniel stared at the paper, confused. His lawn was perfectly trimmed. His car, a clean black SUV, was parked neatly in the driveway. He had done nothing wrong. He let out a slow breath. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they sent the letter to the wrong address. That afternoon, he decided to visit the HOA office to clear things up. He put on a neat shirt, tucked in properly, and carried the letter with him. The meeting was held in a small community hall near the park. When Daniel walked in, every conversation stopped. Heads turned. People stared. The silence in the room was heavy, uncomfortable. At the center table sat Richard Hayes, the HOA president, a man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and a fake smile. He looked up slowly when Daniel approached. "Yes? Can I help you?" Richard asked in a dry, uninterested voice. Daniel stayed calm. "Good afternoon. I received this letter about my property, and I believe there might be a misunderstanding." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Oh, you must be the one from Maple Drive, the house with the large black SUV?" "Yes, that's me," Daniel replied, still polite. "I checked the neighborhood rules. My car and lights are all within the limits." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Mr. Carter, we have to make sure our neighborhood keeps a certain standard." He glanced around and a few people nodded along. "Some of the residents have expressed concerns." "Concerns?" Daniel asked quietly. "About what exactly?" Richard shrugged. "About changes. We like things peaceful here." Daniel understood what he meant. The words were polite, but the tone was not. It wasn't about his car or his lights. It was about him. Still, he kept his voice steady. "I assure you, I'm not here to disturb anyone. I take pride in keeping my home and community safe." Someone at the back of the room muttered under their breath, "We'll see about that." Daniel turned slightly, catching the voice but choosing not to respond. He knew better than to fight hate with anger. Richard smiled thinly. "Well, Mr. Carter, we'll keep an eye on things. Welcome to the neighborhood." The meeting ended with polite nods and cold stares. As Daniel walked out, he felt their eyes on his back, heavy and unkind. That night, he sat by the window thinking about what had happened. His hands were steady, but his heart was heavy. He had worked his entire life for respect, and yet, here he was, judged not by his work but by his skin. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "Stay calm, Daniel. Let your actions speak." The next few days were quiet, but strange things began to happen. Someone left trash bags on his lawn. His mail went missing twice. One morning, he found deep scratches on the side of his SUV. He knew it wasn't random. Someone wanted to provoke him. But Daniel refused to give them the satisfaction. He cleaned the scratches, fixed the mail issue, and kept his composure. At work, his officers noticed he seemed distant, but Daniel didn't share his troubles. As chief of police, he was used to dealing with chaos, but this was different. This was personal. Late one evening, as he looked out at his quiet street, he saw Richard walking his dog. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Richard smiled faintly and nodded as if daring Daniel to react. Daniel didn't move. He just stood there, calm but firm. He knew what was coming wasn't going to be easy. The neighborhood wanted to test him. The HOA wanted to break him. But Daniel Carter wasn't just another homeowner. He was a man who had built his life on patience, strength, and justice. And if they pushed too far, they were about to find out who they were really dealing with. The days that followed were tense. Daniel Carter tried to live peacefully, tending to his yard, fixing broken fixtures, and keeping everything in perfect order. Yet despite his calm demeanor, the neighborhood seemed determined to make his life difficult. Trash mysteriously appeared on his lawn. A rock scratched the side of his car. Letters slipped under his door carried vague threats. It was small, petty harassment, but it weighed heavily on his heart. Daniel understood the feeling all too well. He had faced hostility in his life before, but this was different. This wasn't about crime, disorder, or even authority. This was about fear. Fear of him. Fear of a black man owning his space, his property, his dignity. He refused to respond with anger, no matter how tempting it was. He had a reputation to uphold, not just as a man, but as chief of police. One evening, after a long day at the precinct, Daniel returned home. The street was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. He parked his SUV and stepped out carrying groceries. The sunlight was fading, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns. He felt that familiar weight of judgment, eyes on him even when no one was around. Suddenly, two men appeared at the edge of his driveway. They wore dark blue uniforms and looked official. Their badges glinted in the last light of day. "Evening, sir," one said. "We have a complaint about your property. You're being taken into custody." Daniel froze, gripping the grocery bag tightly. "Taken into custody? On what grounds?" he asked calmly. The man stepped closer. "Trespassing, property damage. There have been reports." "You'll need to come with us," Daniel frowned, studying their uniforms carefully. Something felt wrong. The badges looked cheap. The patches on their sleeves were crooked. Their names were handwritten on paper tags rather than engraved. And the car they had parked down the street, a supposed police cruiser, was missing the official markings. His heart did not race. His mind sharpened. "May I see your identification?" he asked firmly, his voice calm but commanding. The men hesitated. One of them barked, "Don't question us." "Get in the car." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, I'm standing on my property and I demand to see proper ID." At that moment, a few HOA members stepped out from the shadows of the street, their faces twisted with amusement. They whispered to one another and smirked, clearly enjoying the scene. Daniel recognized the president's signature arrogance in their gestures. The tension in the air thickened. Daniel took a deep breath and remained composed. Inside, his pulse was steady, but his anger burned quietly. He would not allow intimidation to control him. Then quietly, deliberately, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around the familiar cold weight of his police badge. He pulled it out slowly and held it up in front of the imposters. The sunlight glinted off the gold, and the words Chief Daniel Carter shone clearly. The men froze. Their confidence evaporated instantly. Faces pale, they stumbled backward. What? One stammered. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low but full of authority. "Do you see this? I am the chief of police for this city. You are not officers. You are imposters, and you have no authority here." The two fake men looked at each other, fear flashing in their eyes. They realized instantly how badly they had miscalculated. Daniel's gaze shifted to the HOA members watching from a distance. His voice cut through the silence like steel. "Who sent you?" The men hesitated, glancing nervously at the HOA. Daniel reached for his radio and spoke into it calmly. "This is Chief Carter. 2 impersonators are attempting to detain me at my residence. Send units immediately." Within moments, the street was alive with flashing lights and the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching. The imposters tried to run, but there was no escape. Patrol cars quickly surrounded the neighborhood, and officers jumped out, cuffing the 2 men as neighbors watched in stunned silence. Daniel stood on his driveway, calm, composed, and resolute. He had faced danger before, but this was personal. He had been tested, humiliated, and challenged in his own home, and he had proven, without a single raised hand, that dignity, patience, and authority could overcome fear and deceit. The flashing red and blue lights painted Daniel Carter's driveway in sharp, dramatic colors. His heart remained steady, his mind clear, and his eyes never left the 2 men cowering before him. They had tried to humiliate him, to scare him out of his own home, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Daniel's voice was calm but carried the weight of command. "Step back now and tell me who sent you." The men glanced nervously at each other. Sweat glistened on their foreheads. Their bravado had vanished the moment they realized they were not dealing with an ordinary homeowner. They were facing the chief of police, a man who had spent his life upholding justice and protecting the innocent. One of the impostors stammered, We were hired." "By who?" Daniel demanded, his eyes narrowing. At the far end of the street, a figure shifted uncomfortably. Richard Hayes, the HOA president, tried to maintain his composure, but the truth was written all over his face. His shoulders slumped slightly. His face paled. He had thought this plan would humiliate Daniel, scare him into leaving, but now everything was unraveling. Daniel stepped forward, holding his badge high. "This isn't just about rules or property. This is about intimidation, harassment, and lies. And now everyone here will see the truth." He pressed the button on his radio. "Units, respond immediately. I need backup for 2 impersonators at my residence. Possible conspiracy involving neighborhood officials." Within minutes, uniformed police officers arrived. They moved with precision and authority, surrounding the 2 imposters. The men tried to run, but the officers blocked every escape route. Handcuffs clicked, and the 2 imposters were taken into custody. Their eyes darted nervously, realizing their plan had failed completely. Daniel turned toward Richard. The HOA president's smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by fear. "Going somewhere, Mr. Hayes?" Daniel asked quietly, but with unmistakable authority. Richard swallowed hard. I didn't think—" Daniel's eyes were steady, almost sorrowful. "You tried to humiliate me. You sent fake officers to intimidate me. You thought a man could be scared out of his own home because of the color of his skin. Do you understand what you've done?" Richard's lips trembled. He had no answer. His entire plan had collapsed before the world could even see it. "You're under arrest," Daniel said finally, his voice firm, calm, and just, "for conspiracy, impersonation, and harassment." Officers quickly moved to place Richard in handcuffs. His protests were weak, pitiful, and ineffective. The neighbors who had once avoided Daniel whispered and stared, suddenly realizing the gravity of what had happened. Daniel did not shout. He did not gloat. He simply stood there, his badge gleaming in the evening sun, his shoulders squared. There was a quiet power in him, a reminder that dignity and truth could never be defeated by fear or deceit. As the patrol cars pulled away with the 2 imposters and the HOA president, Daniel took a deep breath and looked around the neighborhood. The street was quiet again, but now there was a subtle shift. People who had been judgmental, who had whispered behind curtains, were watching him differently. There was respect tinged with awe in their eyes. Daniel walked to his porch and sat down. His hands rested on his knees. He allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He had not just protected his home. He had protected his dignity, his principles, and the very idea that no one could intimidate him unjustly. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Daniel thought about the days ahead, about rebuilding trust, about showing the neighbors that respect and understanding were stronger than fear and prejudice. Inside him, there was a deep emotional satisfaction. He had been tested in the most personal way possible. And now he had proven that courage, calm, and integrity could triumph over deception and malice. For Daniel, it was not about punishment. It was about truth, about standing firm when others tried to bend him, about showing that dignity could never be stolen, no matter how cruelly it was challenged. And in that quiet, glowing evening, Daniel Carter knew that he had won, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been judged unfairly, every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The night air was tense as police lights flashed across Daniel Carter's quiet suburban street. The 2 imposters who had tried to scare him were now cuffed and surrounded by uniformed officers. Their faces, once full of confidence, were pale and defeated. Every plan they had made to humiliate a man in his own home had failed. and now the weight of justice pressed down on them. Daniel watched quietly, his expression calm but intense. He didn't need to shout or show anger. The situation had already spoken for itself. The street, which had been filled with quiet whispers and judgmental eyes, now seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors peeked from windows and doorways, some with curiosity, some with shame. From across the street, Richard Hayes, the HOA president, tried to slink away, but Daniel's gaze stopped him in his tracks. "Going somewhere, Mr. Hayes?" Daniel's voice was quiet, steady, but carried an unshakable authority that made the man freeze. Richard stammered, I didn't think." "You didn't think," Daniel repeated, his eyes locking on Richard's. "You thought you could intimidate me. You sent fake officers to my home. You tried to turn fear into a weapon against a man in his own neighborhood. Do you understand what you've done?" Richard's mouth opened and closed. No words came. His smirk, which he had worn so confidently, was gone. His arrogance had crumbled completely. Daniel reached for his radio. "Backup units, transport HOA President Richard Hayes and the two imposters to headquarters. Evidence and statements will be collected immediately." As the real officers moved in, the street filled with the sound of handcuffs clicking, doors shutting, and tires crunching on gravel. The imposters were pushed gently but firmly into the police cars, their attempts to protest weak and trembling. Richard was cuffed last, his protests now useless, his lies stripped away in the harsh light of justice. Daniel's neighbors watched silently. Some avoided his eyes, perhaps realizing the cruelty they had allowed or encouraged. Others stood at their doors, unsure whether to step forward or stay hidden. Daniel's heart sank briefly for them, for the fear and prejudice that had clouded their judgment. But he did not gloat. There was no joy in their downfall, only the solemn satisfaction of justice served. Daniel understood that true victory was quiet, firm, and righteous, not loud or vengeful. He stepped onto his porch, letting the wind brush over him, and looked down the street. The shadows of the night stretched long across the lawns, and in those shadows the truth now stood clearer than ever. The imposters had been arrested. The HOA president had been exposed. The fear that had hovered over his home was gone, replaced with the unshakable truth that no one could intimidate a man of principle. Daniel felt a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and a quiet sadness. He had been tested in the most personal way possible. A man's home is sacred, and someone had tried to violate that sacred space. Yet Daniel had met the challenge not with violence or anger, but with dignity, authority, and calm resolve. He thought of the lessons this street had now learned. Courage cannot be faked, authority cannot be bought, and respect cannot be demanded through fear. It must be earned. And when it is true, it stands taller than intimidation, deceit, or prejudice. One of the neighbors, a young mother, stepped out onto her porch. Her eyes met Daniel's, wide with awe. She whispered, almost to herself. He stood his ground. He didn't even yell. And they fell apart. Daniel smiled faintly, understanding. It wasn't about proving power or strength. It was about showing that integrity, calmness, and patience could withstand even the cruelest of tests. As the police cars drove away into the night, the street grew quiet once again. Daniel remained on his porch, hands resting on the railing. For the first time since he had moved in, he felt the weight of peace returning. This neighborhood had tried to judge him, to break him, to push him out. But Daniel Carter had proven that dignity and truth could not be shaken. He had faced fear, deceit, and prejudice, and he had emerged stronger, unbroken, and fully in control of his life and home. And in the quiet of that night, Daniel knew that his fight was bigger than himself. It was a fight for justice, for dignity, and for the message that no one, no matter how powerful they think they are, could ever take away a man's rightful place in his own home. The morning after the arrests, the neighborhood felt different. The quiet streets, which had once been filled with whispers and judgmental stares, now carried a strange mixture of awe and shame. News vans arrived, cameras flashing, microphones extended toward Daniel Carter, the man who had faced deception, fear, and prejudice with calm authority. Reporters asked questions from all sides. "Chief Carter, how did you stay so calm?" one young journalist asked, her notebook ready. Daniel looked at her and smiled faintly. "I stayed calm because I knew who I was. I knew my values. And I knew the truth always comes out in the end." Another reporter pressed. "Weren't you afraid when those fake officers came to your home?" Daniel's eyes softened. "No, fear doesn't protect you. Only dignity, patience, and courage do. I've faced danger in my career. This was different, yes, because it was personal. But the principle is the same. Stand firm and let truth guide your actions." The story quickly went viral. HOA sends fake officers to arrest black homeowner. He was the chief of police. Headlines spread across newspapers, social media, and local news. People were shocked. They couldn't believe a homeowner could be targeted in his own neighborhood just for being who he was. A successful, respected black man. Daniel returned to his porch after the media had gone, the early sunlight warming his face. He felt a deep exhaustion but also a quiet peace. The fight was over and justice had been served. The imposters were behind bars. Richard Hayes and the HOA leadership faced serious charges. Investigations were underway to ensure nothing like this could happen again. But Daniel didn't feel victorious in the way most might. He didn't feel like celebrating. Instead, he felt reflective. He thought about the people who had whispered behind curtains, who had judged him before even saying hello. He felt sadness for them, for the fear, prejudice, and assumptions that had guided their actions. Yet, in his heart, Daniel knew that truth had a way of changing things. People learned when they saw courage mixed with dignity. They understood when they witnessed strength paired with patience. He had hoped his actions would not just protect him, but send a message to the neighborhood. Fear and prejudice have no power when confronted with truth and integrity. Mrs. Turner, the kind older neighbor who had first welcomed him, came to his door. She held a small plate of cookies, her eyes glistening. "Daniel," she said softly, "thank you. Thank you for standing strong. You've changed things here, for all of us." Daniel took the plate gently, a small smile on his face. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right. Because no one should feel unsafe or unwelcome in their own home." Children from down the street peeked out from behind fences, shy but curious. Daniel waved to them, smiling. He knew that the message would reach them too. Courage, integrity, and standing up for what is right are the values that truly matter. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood slowly began to change. Conversations became more polite, smiles more genuine, and the weight of judgment lifted, replaced by respect. Daniel's presence became a reminder that justice could be firm but fair, and that dignity always stood taller than fear. He spent quiet evenings on his porch, watching the sunset, listening to the laughter of children playing, feeling a profound sense of relief. He had faced an unfair attack on his home, his dignity, and his name, and he had won without losing his patience, without giving in to anger. Daniel Carter realized that what he had achieved went far beyond a single street. It was a message for the world. Prejudice cannot silence truth. Fear cannot overpower courage, and integrity always prevails. And as he looked at his neighborhood, now calmer and more respectful, he knew that his fight had not been just for him. It had been for everyone who had ever felt judged, unwelcome, or underestimated. For Daniel, justice was not about revenge. It was about making things right, standing firm, and showing that truth and dignity could never be broken. Months had passed since the dramatic night that had changed everything on Daniel Carter's street. The tension, fear, and whispers that had once clouded the neighborhood had gradually faded. In their place, a quiet respect had grown, born not from fear, but from witnessing the strength, patience, and dignity of a man who had refused to be intimidated. Daniel's home, once the target of harassment and deception, now stood as a symbol of resilience. His lawn was perfectly trimmed, flowers bloomed along the walkway, and his black SUV gleamed in the sunlight. But the true transformation wasn't just in the house, it was in the people around it. Neighbors who had once turned away now greeted him with smiles and polite nods. They had seen up close what it meant to face cruelty without surrendering to it, and they respected him for it. One morning, as Daniel stepped onto his porch with a cup of coffee, Mrs. Turner, the kind older lady who had first welcomed him, approached. She held a small tray of cookies, her eyes bright and warm. "Daniel, I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice soft. "Not just for what you did for yourself, but for all of us. You've made this street safer, kinder, better." Daniel smiled gently. "Mrs. Turner, I didn't do it for thanks. I just wanted to do what was right. Every person deserves to feel safe and respected in their home." Her eyes shimmered with tears as she nodded. "You've reminded us what courage and dignity really look like." As she walked back inside, Daniel watched children playing down the street. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that had been missing during those tense weeks. He realized that his actions had done more than protect his own home. They had taught a lesson to the next generation, that courage, integrity, and standing up for what is right were values that mattered far more than fear, prejudice, or selfishness. He thought of the HOA president and the imposters who had tried to intimidate him. They had faced justice, yes, but Daniel didn't dwell on anger or revenge. Justice, he knew, was not about punishment alone. It was about restoring balance, truth, and fairness. And in that he felt a deep sense of peace. Even the neighbors who had once been cold or suspicious began to show small acts of kindness. A new family moved into the street, diverse and welcoming. They waved at Daniel warmly, and he waved back, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The neighborhood, once fractured by fear and prejudice, was slowly becoming a true community. Daniel spent evenings on his porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunset. He felt the cool breeze on his face, listening to the soft hum of life around him. Each day brought small moments of peace, a neighbor saying hello, children playing safely, the quiet certainty that he had made his home and his community a better place. In his mind, he reflected on the journey, the threats, the intimidation, the attempts to make him leave. They had tested him in ways no one else could understand. But he had faced them with calm, with dignity, and with unwavering faith in justice. And now, months later, he could see the results: respect, understanding, and hope. Daniel Carter knew that he had done more than protect his property. He had protected his dignity, his principles, and the message that no one could take away a person's rightful place in their own home. He had proven that fear and prejudice are powerless against courage and truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the street, Daniel smiled softly to himself. He had won, not just for him, but for every person who had ever felt judged, unwelcome, or underestimated. His home was peaceful again, his neighbors learning respect, and his heart filled with quiet pride. The wind rustled the trees, carrying the laughter of children and the soft,